Hi there, ladies and gents. We're here with topic 3, talking about business communication, communication in the business place. And so we're going to learn a lot about the types of communication that happen, how communication moves, how it flows, and what's expected as it relates to the different communication methods and channels that are used within a business environment. Think about it. If the office is the central hub, there has to be proper communication to make sure that things are going where they're supposed to be going, making sure that the right people get the information that they need. And so communication in business is very, very, very important. As always, I'm going to welcome you to the virtual space. Let's work together to learn, share ideas, participate, and learn something new. And like I like to say, the wise always seek knowledge. So let's get that knowledge. When we talk about business communication, I want you to know it's so important. The office needs to be able to communicate back and forth, not just internally, which means everybody within the business, but also externally. That's the persons outside as well. Your customers, you have people that businesses have to communicate for tax purposes, maybe the government, or they have to communicate with their vendors, which is the persons they're going to buy things from, so that they can place orders and purchase things that they need in order to operate as a business. Communication is needed back and forth to all of these different parties that the businesses work with. Our customers are also external persons that the business communicates with. Internally, if there's a particular department that needs to speak to another department or share a message or place an order, they need to be able to communicate as well. And so communication is key, no matter whether or not you're talking or communicating with somebody physically in your work building or outside. Okay. And so we're just going to talk about types of communication and the flow of communication. When we think of types of communication, there are 2 types of communication. We said originally that we have internal and external persons that we communicate with, but there are 2 ways to communicate with these people or these set of persons we're communicating to. There's formal and then there's informal. And when we think about formal communication, think of somebody that got dressed up for the nicest banquet or the nicest party ever. Their black tie, suit and tie, their formal long gown with extra makeup and all the other stuff. That's formal. They're being very formal. They're being very prepared, being very dressed up. And so any type of communication that's considered to be formal is going to be one that's very planned out, very organized, and that gives off a certain appearance that that person is put together, that information is put together. That type of communication normally happens in the form of things like letters. And so in a business, letters are ways to fancy up conversation with other companies or businesses or customers. There's not the only type of form of communication, but that's a good example of one, a letter being sent out to an external party, because letters are normally only sent out to persons outside of the business. Now, on the other hand, informal, we're going to think of the exact opposite. The lady here, she's not as dressed up as she could be. She has on a nice little top and a nice skirt, but she is not very strictly put together. She's just very loosely, very casually, very calmly put together. And so when we think of informal communication, we're going to think of something that's not so uptight, something that's not so, let's say, user-friendly, reader-friendly, person-friendly. It may not be the nicest thing that your boss will see. You're not going to send something that's informal to your boss if you don't have to. And so that could be in the form of like a sticky note, but you write some information on a note and you stick it on a desk, or a message pad, or maybe even gossip. Gossip is something that's considered to be informal, talking through the grapevine, that's gossip. All of that is considered to be informal because it's not something that the business would present to persons outside to make sure they look good. And so whenever you talk about notes and memorandums and just casual conversations in the office, gossiping, all of those are considered to be informal forms or types of communication. Next, let's look at the flow of communication. When we talk about the flow of communication, think of wave moving. How does a wave move? And when we talk about communication, communication is flowing downward, it's flowing upward, and it's also flowing horizontally side to side. And so let's think about our organizational chart. Remember that the person at the very top usually is a senior person. They're a manager with great influence versus persons at the bottom are usually your daily workers that put in a lot more work to make sure that the business is running properly. And so communication can flow from the top to the bottom of an organizational chart, making it a downward flow. So sometimes the managers or the chief persons are going to communicate some things below. Maybe they're communicating the rules of the company, the way that they want their employees to behave. That's going to be downward communication because it starts with the head and it flows down to everybody at the bottom of the chain, pretty much. When we think about upward communication, it's the exact opposite. We start from the bottom and we're taking information up to the top. So if we understand or we heard something or we know something about the company that is extremely important that needs to get up to senior managers, there's sometimes the regular staff or the line staff are sending that information up, making it upward communication. Then we have horizontal communication, of course, which happens with people on the same level. So line staff on the same level can communicate across each other and share information as well. And so that's considered to be your horizontal communication. There may be managers on the same level. They're all senior managers and they're communicating with each other as well. That's communicating on a horizontal level as well. And no matter what flow the communication is, downward, upward, horizontal, no matter which type of communication, formal or informal, no matter who it's going to, internal or external, it's important to the business. When we think of communication, we also have to think about communication climate, because you'll find that a lot of companies, sometimes it's easy to communicate in that company, sometimes it's difficult to communicate in that company. And so that means that we have two different communication climates that can happen within a company. It can be closed or it can be open. When we have open communication, staff normally tend to feel free to express their opinions, their voice their complaints, and offer suggestions to different persons. It's easy to share information. When we think of closed communication, maybe staff don't feel as free to talk about things or ideas and they just want to get it over with. And therefore, there's sometimes information doesn't go where it's supposed to go and information is blocked. And so a lot of restriction happens in closed communication climates. Employees tend not to feel comfortable talking and voicing their opinions and passing information on to their supervisors or their managers. And that's never a good thing. Most companies should strive to have an open communication climate. Now, let's talk about something that's very important, because we know that communication is important. However, if there's something wrong in the process, what happens is the communication can't happen. And so we call these barriers to communication. And so barriers to communication are things that negatively impact the communication process. They stop it or they make it difficult to happen the way it should. These barriers are things like biases. If there's a personal bias against somebody that's speaking to you, it's going to be difficult to receive that information. And so therefore, communication is stopped, it's blocked. There can also be language barriers. Imagine trying to speak to somebody that speaks a different language and doesn't know English. They're not going to understand what you're saying, and you're not going to properly communicate. That's a language barrier. Literacy is also a barrier because it's difficult if you're trying to express something to someone Maybe you're using some big words. Maybe they don't understand certain key concepts. They're not going to understand what you're communicating. Perceptions, one's beliefs. With perceptions, perceptions talk about one's beliefs. So if I believe that a person is a liar, it's going to be hard for me to believe what they're actually trying to tell me. And so person's beliefs, personal beliefs, do affect the way communication is shared and communication is received. And so it's important to think of things like perception as a barrier to actually finishing the communication process properly. Another one can be semantics, or what I like to call colloquialisms. Imagine somebody coming in from the United States and you're talking to them in your Bahamian vernacular. You're using Bahamian words that they may not be familiar with, or Bahamian phrases that they may not understand. Because they don't understand, you're stopping the communication process. And so semantics plays a key part in that process, and therefore affects how the person receiving the information understands what message you're trying to send. Because in all things, the communication process involves trying to send a specific message. And so, like I said, biases affect that message. Language differences affect the message. The person being able to understand what you're saying affects the message. Your own perceptions or that person's perceptions can affect the message. And improper use of semantics and colloquialisms can also affect the person understanding what you're trying to say. And could you imagine in business, there's a lot of information to share with persons inside and outside. And you want to make sure these barriers are minimized as much as possible by trying to make sure you think about the conversation first, or think about the communication first, to avoid coming up against any of these barriers. Next, we're going to talk about the elements of communication. And so the communication process involves 5 different elements. We have the message, which is the information that's being shared. The sender, the person that's actually beginning the communication process or sending the information to somebody else. We have the channel, which is the method used to communicate the actual message. The receiver, the person receiving the message, and then feedback, information that comes back to the sender as a result of sending that message to the receiver. And so we're going to go through each of these 5 elements to have a good understanding of what happens when communication happens. So before I move forward, let's think about a particular piece of communication that an office can have. Maybe an office is having a sale and they want to communicate to you as their customer that there's a sale. And so we already know what the message is going to be. The message is going to be, hey, there's a sale. I want you to come and buy some things while we have a sale. I am going to be the sender at the business. And so I have to decide how I'm going to send it to you. Am I going to send it to your email? Am I going to put on the radio? Am I going to use social media? All of that is important. And because that's a part of choosing the channel to make sure that communication gets to you as soon as possible in a way that you can actually understand it as well. And so the channel is going to be selected, and that channel allows me to communicate my message to you, the receiver. After you've seen my message, I can either get no feedback, which means that maybe it wasn't positive, or I can get positive feedback by actually seeing you in my store, purchasing from the items that are on sale. So let's talk about these elements a little bit more. The message is the first one. And so, of course, the message is going to be the data or the information that's being shared. Like we use in an example, it could talk about a sale, letting persons know about a sale, letting persons know you're closing early, or maybe even letting persons know, hey, we're moving. You could even express things like letting a customer know that we're so happy that you're a new customer. Every time you, sign up to a new website and you say, I want to be on the mailing list, what happens? They communicate to you. They send you an email, and that email may say something like, hey, thanks so much for becoming, joining our website. That's a message that's being communicated to you. And so anything that the company is trying to share or they're trying to give to the receiver is considered to be a message. And you're going to learn later on that messages come in different forms. But for right now, just know that a big, most important element of the communication process is a message. Because if you don't have a message, you're not communicating anything, and communication can't happen. After the message, well, we skipped the sender, and that's because that's straightforward. The sender is a person sending the information. That's going to be somebody in the company possibly sending the information, or maybe somebody is sending the information to the company and the company is the receiver. Senders and receivers are pretty straightforward. Let's look at the channel now. The channel is the way information can travel from the sender to the receiver. And so when it comes to a channel, there are different methods that information can be sent or that a message can be sent. And those methods normally translate to different channels. Your main methods of sending information is going to be written, oral, electronic, and visual. So that's pretty much 4 of the main ways that information can be sent. A lot of times they're actually intertwined as well, and you'll see it when we go through them. Channels are the ways that once we decide on a method, which way are we going to use to send the information based on that method? And so I put them next to each other so you can kind of see it. When we have, let's say we choose a written method of communication, the channel is going to be either it's going to be something like a memo, something like a letter, or something that's in writing. If it's oral, it's going to be something that involves speaking. So maybe a speech or a telephone is the way you telephone call is the way you decide to send the message. If it's electronic, maybe use something like a webinar or use an email. If it's visual, well, maybe use a presentation or a video to send your message across. As you can see, something like an email doesn't fit in one category. An email is electronic because you're using it on the computer and sending it via the computer, but it's also something that's written. And so you're going to find that some of these methods can coexist together, or these channels fall into different method categories, but that's okay. Just understand that there are different methods and there are different channels that can be used. And if it's written, once you can see it and it's something that's on paper or something that can be read, it's written. If it's something that can be heard, spoken out, it's oral, sorry. If it's something that you need an electronic device to use or see, it's electronic. And if it's something that you're looking at, it's something that's visual, okay? Feedback is our final one, and that's just information that's communicated back to the sender. So like I said, maybe when I sent you the sale information, maybe you didn't send me a response back, but the information I got from you is visual because I saw you in the store purchasing items on the sale. And so to me, that's still feedback telling me that my message was received successfully and that the channel that I used got you and that you responded positively by actually listening and coming to check out my sale. Okay, all of those are your 5 main elements of the communication process. Okay, so we talked about our different channels and our different methods. And so we're going to go into more details about those methods. But here's something that I want you to know about the methods and the different channels. In business, you're going to have to decide which channel is the best channel to use. In my example given, I said, maybe I put it out on social media or I sent a WhatsApp out about my sale. I would have chosen to use WhatsApp and social media because I think that maybe it's something that you would have actually seen instead of trying to send a text or trying to make a phone call. Maybe you might not have answered the unknown number. When it comes to communicating in business, you have to make sure you know exactly the best way to communicate the message you have. If I'm trying to send a message about store closures and I know that there's an individual coming to me, it may not be best to put it on social media alone. I may also want to choose a method that gets that person directly. So picking up the phone and making a telephone call. All of that has to be thought of when sending a message because you want to make sure that certain things are made compromised based on the channel that you're using to send the message. And so there are some things to consider when you're choosing a channel. And so what I want to tell you to do, be cool. Be cool about your choice. Cool. Get it? CCULE. Cool. Think about confidentiality. Is this information that everybody needs to know? Because if it is, then it's okay for me to post it on social media. However, if it's specific and not everybody should know, it should be confidential, then maybe I want to send it to whoever needs to know only. That will help me to pick the right channel, knowing how confidential the information is. Confidential just means that, hey, is it a secret? Is it private? If it's private, then not everybody should know. The cost of using a particular channel as well is a major factor because you don't want to break the company's bank account to send a message. Maybe you don't want to have a 3-hour phone call to Australia and pay for that, pay the 3-hour rate call. Maybe it's cheaper to just go and have a webinar or a call on Zoom or something like that. It's going to be cheaper. And therefore, in business, you're in business to make money. Of course, you're going to pick the channel that's most cost effective. A short call to somebody on the same island, that's not expensive. That may be the better option on an island, but may not be the better option if you're calling somebody far away in a different time zone and for a longer period of time. So that's something to be considered. Urgency, how quickly do we need to get this message passed on? Because of course, I may not want to use social media depending on what the message is, because how do I know the person I'm trying to reach is on their social media? I don't know. And so sometimes it may be better to pick up the phone and have a phone call because that will tell me if the person is available and it'll most likely allow me to get the person as quick as possible. Location is also a factor in the choice because depending on where the person is, that could increase the cost. Just like the example with the telephone call. If a person is very far away and you're making a telephone call, the cost of the telephone call is going to be more. And so based on the location of the person you're trying to reach, it may just be easier to send a letter or send out an email or have a video call on the internet. All of those things can affect it. Whereas if it's somebody within the office, well, it doesn't make any sense to have a video call. Maybe you need to call them and ask them to come and see you, and you see them face to face. That affects the channel that you use. And of course, effectiveness. If something doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense to do it. All right, now let's move on. Let's talk about the different forms of communication, one of them being written communication. And so written communication, of course, is when we're communicating to a receiver in written form. And common forms of written communication in an office environment are letters, memos, advertisements, reports, emails, telephone directories, manuals. These are all ways you can send a message to someone, whether in the office, internal, or outside of the office, external. And so it's a point worth mentioning. When it comes to written communication, you have to make sure that you're a good writer. and make sure that your message is clear. And so to be a good writer, it's suggested that you should improve your reading skills by improving comprehension, your ability to understand. My God. Also going to improve your vocabulary, and that's the words that you use when you're having when you're writing, and include your speed in reading. That helps you to be able to check your work and make sure everything is fine with written communication. Characters of effective writing. I just put this out there. This is an absolute need to know. There are 5 C's to effective writing. They are there are 5 C's to effective writing, which are being complete, making sure that all necessary information is included, being polite, being as nice as possible in your writing, being correct, free of any errors, being concise, which is being to the point, not wasting words, not adding all that extra fluff, and then being correct, giving truthful information. And so this is something that they love to ask. So it's something that you should know. When we talk about documents in written form, I want you to know that somebody's going to be preparing the document. It could be you or somebody else. But when preparing documents, whether it be a letter, memo, an advertisement, you want to make sure you gather as much information as possible, understand your message so that you give the right message, prepare a draft, which is just your first copy of the letter before you've reviewed it and made any changes. You're going to revise and edit the document. So look at it, make changes, rewrite some things, fix some things. You're going to proofread the document, make any corrections, prepare a final copy, and then get approval if needed. So if somebody needs to sign off on the letter before it's sent, then that's a part of the preparation process for the written document. In understanding the message, you want to know that there are multiple message types, 3 of them to be exact. We have a message can either be positive or neutral. And so that's just sharing good news, saying, hey, you won something, or thank you for being a customer, or just giving information. We're closing, we'll be closed on a particular day. Those are positive and neutral messages. And then those you just want to be direct. Say what you have to say and just try to get the information out there as quickly as possible. Some thought has to go into negative messages. Maybe you want to tell a customer that their account is going to be closed or you're shutting down. What you want to do is you don't want to be direct. Don't go straight to the point. You want to try and be a little bit indirect. You want to state what the problem is or what the negative message is, yes, but you don't come out of the gate saying, hey, you're about to be fired. No, you want to add a little fluff to it. Start off by saying a nice word or saying something positive, trying to sandwich it in, put that bad news in the middle there. But start off with something positive, get to the bad news, and then you should state why you're rejecting somebody or why the bad news is necessary. And then, as you know, the bottom part of that sandwich, you can offer suggestions and help the person to feel better about the rejection. That's the tips when it comes to writing negative messages from a business standpoint, because you want to make sure that the company has some goodwill, which means that even though it's a negative message, you don't want whoever's receiving it to hate the company. You want to try to do it in a way that makes them feel okay, or that it's easier to get over the negative message. And then, of course, there can be persuasive messages, which is just a message where you're trying to get somebody to do something. Let's say you're trying to get them to come out to a sale, or you're trying to get them to buy something. That's a different type of message as well. When we talk about all of these messages and these different documents, there are formats that usually have to be followed. And so business documents usually have a specific format that should be remembered and followed. And we'll talk about that in another topic. Let's talk about electronic communication. And that's communication over any type of electronic channel. And is usually best when communicating across countries or far distances. Here, if you're not familiar, it's a fax machine, has a telephone attached to something that looks like a printer. You're able to dial a number. And so it's a form of electronic communication because you're using a device. You can use your computer to send emails, to prepare letters, or just, well, not letters, but to prepare messages on social media, all of that. And then there's also electronic communication in the form of video conferences or video calls. All of those are electronic. Visual communication is communication that contains something to be viewed. So just like in the previous one, visual communication can happen in the form of a webinar or a video call. There can be a presentation, somebody showing things like graphs and pictures as a part of their presentation. That's also visual. And then something like a TV, having an advertisement or something going on television is also a form of visual communication. Verbal or oral communication is communication that involves speaking and listening. So somebody sending out an ad on the radio, that's a part of verbal or oral communication because you can hear what information is being shared. A speech can also be a part of this type of communication, as well as watching something on the television. A part of it is going to involve listening. When we talk about verbal communication, we want to ensure that we're not wasting our breath, but that communication is effective. And so that means that we have to listen and speak well in order to properly communicate verbally. And so that's going to involve improving listening skills and improving speaking skills. And so some ways to improve listening skills are to start off by having a positive attitude. It's difficult to listen to someone if you have a negative attitude or you have a bad attitude. So start with a positive attitude, respect others while they're speaking, listen so you can contribute or say something in the end after they're done speaking. You want to focus on what they're saying. You want to mentally summarize what they're saying. That helps with you being able to contribute in the end. Make eye contact and take notes and ask questions if need be to show that you are paying attention. If you're improving speaking, what you want to do is think before speaking. Make sure you're showing interest. Use a proper tone. So that's not screaming at somebody when you're speaking to them, but speaking to them in a way that they don't feel offended by the way that you're speaking to them, or the volume in your voice as well, or the pitch. You want to pronounce words clearly. Use standard English by avoiding slang and colloquialisms. No boy, what's good, none of that stuff. Use standard English in business. You want to consider your audience. You want to be aware of non-verbal communication, which are things like facial expressions, eye movements, posture, the way your body is fixed, gestures, things like that. Speaking with your hands, you want to be aware of those. And fidgeting, playing with something on your hand, playing with a pen. Normally, if you're fidgeting, you're not listening. And if you're speaking to someone and fidgeting, that means you're not making good eye contact and you're not showing them that they are the center of your attention. That's it for communication and business communication. I hope it helps. I hope you remember key things about communication, why it's important to share information throughout the office, throughout the different departments, to persons outside, so that's internally and externally. To remember that information can be formal, dressed up, and looking very specific, or informal, very, very casual. Knowing that information goes up from the bottom of your hierarchy or your organization to persons at the top, or top to bottom, or persons on the same level, side to side, which is horizontal. Talking about methods of communication, which can be visual, communicating visually, orally, written, electronically, knowing that even though you have methods of communication, there are different channels that fall within those methods, which are more specific. So more specific than written communication. I'm not going to say I'm going to do written communication to share this information. No, I'm going to write a letter, or I'm going to write a memo. Being specific about the method you choose is called our channel. Knowing that in communicating, there are 5 elements, and those elements are all needed when it comes to preparing the message and making sure it gets from the receiver, from the sender to the receiver with the appropriate channel, so that the sender can get some feedback. Knowing the 5 C's, very important of effective communication: correct, concise, complete, courteous, and correct. What else? Knowing that there are barriers to communication that you want to make sure you avoid. All of that is important when we understand business communication. So I hope this helps. If you have any questions, please feel free to send an email, hit me up on Insta, or you can put comments in the section of the Teachable site where you have the content for this course. Happy studying. Hi, Brenda here. I just want to take the time to say thank you for choosing this course. Thank you for choosing yourself and for preparing, as you should, for Office Procedures BGCSE. Look forward to more from me and Business Teacher Powell, and I look forward to seeing you in other classes. Bye.